It is 6:09 in Singapore, the day after a stunning moment on the world stage, a historic summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong and President Trump.
Right now, Air Force One is flying back to Washington, D.C., back stateside, of course. Local leaders are reacting and talking to 13 News Now reporter Megan Shin.
And Megan, what's the overall reaction?
Well, David, Regina, I got conflicting reactions today, and the reactions that we spoke with Republican and Democratic lawmakers who don't deny the summit was historic. But the result of the president's meeting is up for debate.
I'm proud that we're at this point.
It's disturbing, to say the least.
Opposite reactions from different parties when it comes to some of Virginia's congressional members. Republican Representative Scott Taylor of Virginia Beach says he's optimistic about the meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Now, we should all be rooting for the president to get things done, and anything that reduces the nuclear threat to our homeland is a good thing.
Democrat Don McEachin of Henrico County says,
It's always good to have open lines of communication. What you don't do, though, is give away things without getting something in return.
Donald Trump reversed the order of this.
13 News Now political analyst Quentin Kidd says traditionally presidents meet with other countries' leaders after negotiations are done.
It would initiate sort of your coming out into the world as a leader worthy of meeting with the U.S. president.
In this meeting, the president promised to end a military drill with South Korea in exchange for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
That was the only tangible thing that came out of the meeting, right? The rest of it is essentially a memorandum of understanding that says we're going to work on these things, and we have this ultimate goal of a denuclearized peninsula.
For Virginia, which includes one of the largest military communities in the world, lawmakers say it could mean more action if North Korea breaks its promise.
It seems like the president's coming back empty-handed.
And cautiously optimistic that we will move in that direction, that North Korea will, in fact, do what they said they were going to do.
And we heard from Senator Tim Kaine, who says, quote, "We've seen no details on whether North Korea will disclose everything that's in their nuclear arsenal or how we could verify each step they take to dismantle it." In the studio, Megan Shin, 13 News Now.